program is brought to you by Canton Community Television. Now from the television studios of Canton High School.
Welcome to the Dog Pound. I'm your host Marcos. Today in the Dog Pound we have Miss Caufield, who is going to tell us about the ESL program and how it helps the ESL students to become fluent in English. Hi, Miss Caufield, welcome.
Hi, thank you. Nice to be here.
So, why did you choose to become an ESL teacher?
So, I initially, in my career, started out as something completely different. And in that career, I noticed that there were many people who didn't know how to speak English fluently that really needed some support. So I wanted to come back to schools and teach young people how to speak English.
That's pretty good. Do you teach other subjects?
I don't. I don't teach any other subjects.
But if you would, which one you would choose?
Oh, if I would teach another subject, I would probably, I don't know. I've never thought about that. I honestly don't think I would teach anything else. I love teaching ESL. Yeah.
Why?
Well, I have the best students in the school, always. And my students, I feel like they work harder than almost anybody else in the school. And that means a lot. It's exciting for me to see them, being motivated and learning and growing.
So what ESL means?
So ESL stands for English as a Second Language. So when a student moves to the country, moves to Canton, and they register for schools, if we notice that they speak another language on their paperwork, then I come in and do an assessment and enroll them in the program.
Why is it important the English learners to do part of the ESL?
Well, to learn English, right? So to become fluent, and it's also, I think, the ESL program, a big part of it, a big piece of it is students making connections with other students that look like them and speak the language that they speak.
That's a really important part, right?
Yes, exactly. Building connections and relationships and families. Because without having those connections and relationships, it's, I think, really hard to be in school and learning.
Yeah. So can you tell us some abilities the ESL program offers to their students?
Yeah, so the ESL program in Canton High School is it's different than it is in the middle school and elementary schools, because at the high school, students are enrolled in my class. Whereas in the middle school and elementary schools, the ESL teacher goes into the classes with the students primarily. So we have, that's called pull out, when I have students come to me. So they come to me and I do work with them, teaching them about listening, speaking, reading, and writing in English. And then other services we offer, I'm always helping students with other classwork too. So going back to that question about would I teach another subject, I kind of help kids learn everything, all the classes. So.
Oh yeah, but like other abilities instead of like learning English, you think what are the abilities that it can give?
The students?
Yeah.
What abilities students bring to the ESL program?
Yeah, they get.
Okay, so lots and lots of things. I learn from my students every day. And that's one of the things, too, that's really exciting for me as a teacher. Students bring their experiences and knowledge from all parts of the world. We have students from Asia, Europe, South America, the Caribbean, all over. Europe. Did I say Europe?
Brazil.
Brazil, yes, of course.
So can you explain how the ESL program helps the students to develop the English?
Right, so in the class, we practice, like I said, our skills with listening, speaking, reading, and writing. This year in particular, I'm trying to focus a lot more on the speaking piece, because students don't have a lot of time in their classroom during their classes to speak, because everything happens so quickly, right? And my students have to hear the content in English, then translate it from English, for example, to Portuguese, and then think of their answer in Portuguese, and then translate it back to English, and then you can share it. And that takes a long time. So my students don't always have a lot of opportunities to speak in English. So that's been my main focus this year.
Could you give like us an example of what you do to help them with the speaking?
Yeah. So actually, we just finished doing interviews. So I had students, we randomly selected partners, and they created a list of, I think it was 5 to 7 questions.
Yeah.
And then they interviewed their partner, and they're going to be presenting the information soon. Not like this, though.
Oh, okay. But it's gonna be like in a website, something
No,
like that?
just in the class, because
Oh,
we just
okay.
want to keep it simple.
Yes.
Keep it low key.
So they don't be shy, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
less pressure.
So, do you think there are other efficient ways to learn a new language?
Yeah, I mean, I think the very best way to learn any language is to immerse yourself in it. So listen to everything in English, for example. Watch everything in English. Read everything in English. Do as much as you can to practice all of those skills. I use Duolingo. I recommend it. I'm practicing my French. So that's another good thing. And something that I also do is when I watch television shows, I put subtitles in French, so I can try and I can hear it in English, but I can read it in French. Not very well.
normally, I knew like the story was the opposite. Like you put the language in French and then you
Read it in English. Yeah. So
do you think like video games and music can help too?
absolutely, yeah, 100%. Because there's a lot of language in. I mean, I don't really play a lot of video games, but there's a lot of language in video games, I imagine, and definitely, watching TV, listening to music, reading books, any of that stuff.
So can you explain why you think these other ways are efficient?
Could you repeat the question? Sorry.
Can you explain why you think the other ways of learning English can be efficient too?
Why they can be efficient?
Yeah.
Well, because the more you practice, the more you put yourself out there, the more you're going to learn. When I was 21, I lived in Madrid, Spain, for a year, and I didn't learn Spanish, even though I lived there for a year, because all of my friends spoke English. Oh. And I was too embarrassed to put myself out there and speak Spanish and sound like a baby. Yeah. Because when you're just learning a language, if you're just beginning and you're talking, you do sound like a baby because you're using very simple words. But that's part of the process.
So you would recommend people to like talk more and try more, even
Yes.
though they're gonna sound funny.
Yeah, and even though it's uncomfortable and scary, and probably for me anyway, I was embarrassed because I felt like I sounded stupid, even though I knew I wasn't.
Yeah. Can you describe the benefits of learning a new language?
Yeah, there's actually a lot of scientific research about this topic, and that people that know more than one language are bilingual, trilingual, multilingual language speakers they're smarter. Their brains work. It's hard to explain. It's like they work harder because they have all this information in all these different languages. We were talking before this interview, and you were saying that there's some words in Portuguese that don't make sense in English, and some words in English that don't make sense in Portuguese. And so it's like, I just lost my train of thought. Sorry. Oh yeah, so that translanguaging. So you're learning different words, phrases, things about cultures in different languages. So it all just grows your brain.
Yeah. Can you tell us some tips you would give to students that want to learn a second language?
Yeah, I keep going back to it. Talk. Practice. Find somebody that speaks the language that you want to learn and ask them to help you practice talking. There are also programs in the community that help people with conversational English too. So, yeah, classes are good, but definitely if you can connect with somebody that speaks the language that you want to learn, that's happy to practice with you, that's probably one of the best ways.
What is the hardest thing to teach the students?
The hardest thing to teach students, I think, is writing in school.
Really?
Yeah. Well, I don't know. Well, because writing, like texting your friends or emailing people, that's kind of much more not as professional, but when you're at school, the writing, the expectation is that it's much more professional sounding, right?
Yeah.
And so that gets technical. And a lot of my students, didn't have English grammar, or, they didn't study English grammar at their schools growing up. So, there's a lot of grammatical mistakes and spelling mistakes and things like that.
And like terms and that stuff.
Exactly.
Oh.
Yeah.
So I actually thought the hardest thing was actually speaking, because normally we have like all these like, this sound that sounds
Yes.
different and all that stuff that sometimes it's even harder to the other people
Yeah.
understand. It's like,
Well, I think that the speaking part is hard, but I think teaching speaking isn't as hard, because teaching speaking is really about practicing talking, right?
Yeah.
Creating spaces where you can have conversations in English. But from my own experience when I lived in Spain, talking was very hard because I was so embarrassed and so nervous.
And also, what do you think is the easiest thing to teach the students?
Academically teach them?
Yeah, could
Like in
be.
school?
Yeah.
Probably, I think listening. The skill of listening is usually the first one to really develop highly. And when a student first moves to the country, there's typically a period of time that we call the silent period, which is the time where the student is really just listening and listening and listening and taking everything in, but not able to say it, not able to output it yet.
Yeah, I concur. Like I think listening is actually like one of the easiest things to learn, but you masterize like it's harder, because it's normally gonna be like some specific words that you don't know. So
Right.
like it becomes harder and harder.
Yeah, and a new student registered recently, and when I was talking with him, he seemed to understand quite a bit, and I asked him how much he understood, and he said about 65%. But he wasn't able to really express that. He wasn't talking that much yet. So we're going to be practicing that with him.
We're gonna make another fluent English.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Another fluent English speaker.
So what do you notice to be the biggest challenge for the students in learning a second language?
Oh, in school or
in
in school? I'm going to go back to the speaking and writing. Speaking, I think, is the hardest because there's not as much opportunity in classes to have conversations in English, academic conversations in English. See, we mess up too.
Even the teachers.
Even the teachers.
And in general, like you said, in general, so like in general in English, what is?
What's the biggest challenge? Gosh, there's so many challenges. People are coming from different places all over the world, and many people have not been able to go to school for a long time, or they're in a place where there is war or poverty, and there's sometimes some really scary things that have happened. So I think all that other stuff is the stuff that is the most challenging, like the things that the people, that their past and their history, that's the sort of stuff that's the hardest.
You mean like adapting to the new place and all that
Yes.
stuff?
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I know. Do you notice any barriers between the ESL students and the fluent students?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's harder to access the information that the teachers are putting out if you aren't proficient in English, whereas people who are fluent or native speakers obviously can get that information much more easily. So, yeah, there's so many challenges, but so many really wonderful things about being an ESL teacher. I think overall, it's a great job. I love it, and I love my students.
But like, which type of barrier you notice? Like, what is the biggest barrier you notice?
For students in school,
Yeah, for students that doesn't speak English to the students that speak. What is the biggest barrier?
Okay, I think the biggest barrier might be the being afraid that they don't know and that they're not going to sound normal. They're not going to be able to express their feelings and thoughts. So I think that's a real challenge.
Like misunderstanding, right?
Yeah. I think a lot of people assume that if somebody doesn't talk, if somebody doesn't speak English, that they don't know stuff, right? Everybody comes to this school with knowledge and experience. They just might not be able to express it. And so I think that's a real challenge for people.
Actually, going back to the question before, because I was going to say something, but I forgot.
Okay.
You were saying about the hearing all that stuff.
Listening.
Is also hard for the new students because we don't only have these different subtitles and stuff from the out of the person's out of the America. We also have from the American.
Yep.
So it's kind of hard. I have my own experience. I was in the job and someone asked for a wine chocolate. I was like, what is wine? And then I discovered wine is actually
Right.
H-A-Y, double Y, double V, I-E. You know the country.
Yeah.
So I think
It's hard. Well, and Joao, when you came, or Marco, excuse me, when you came here last year,
call me whatever you want.
you were in my program. You came into my program, and you took every year in January, ESL students have to take what's called the access test, and that measures their English proficiency in the speaking, listening, reading, and writing domains. And you took that, and you passed it. You hadn't even been here a year, and you passed it because your English is so good.
Oh, thank you.
And because you put yourself out there, and you interact with people, and you talk with your teachers, and you practice.
Yeah, guys, you need to practice and say with everyone. Speak.
Speak.
So thank you, Ms. Garfield, for giving these insights about the Kent High School English as a second language. It's a pleasure for you to be here.
Aww.
And all the time you're giving to just say a little about all the work you do, all these years and all this stuff. I'm very thankful for all the help you gave me, and you give me you're an awesome person.
Thank you.
If you're learning English, you need to learn with her.
Thank you for saying that.
For Kent Community Television, I'm Marcos. Thanks for watching. Bye.
Our Period D crew today is Dan Albert, Marcus Barbosa, Nala Katilli, Tom Cardy, Dan Ferrara, Connor Deegan, Nolan Gillis, Asher Hung, Emma O'Hare, Tommy Rose, Mike Sullivan, Devin Townsend, Nick Turano, Leo Villafate, and Adrian Welch. I'm John Flood. Thanks for watching.
You know what? I don't really like this game. Are we feeling cool?
Sure.
This program is brought to you by Kenton Community Television, now from the television studios of Kent High School.
Everyone, and welcome to the Dog Pound. I'm your host, Devin Townsend. Today, I've invited a teacher from Canton High School, from the Canton High School History Department, Mr. Goff, to share some insight on what the day-to-day life is like for a teacher in the education environment. Thank you for coming today, Mr. Goff.
Well, thank you for having me, Devin. I appreciate being here. Thank you.
So, one of the first things I'd like to know about you is that every teacher has their own definition of what it means to teach someone. So, What would you say your definition is?
That's a great question. I would say in my discipline, it's teaching not just content but also skills so that they learn some of the American culture, some of American law, but at the same time also develop skills like argumentative writing. And then if they can leave my classroom with more knowledge and a deeper set of skills, I think that would be kind of the ideal for me.
What type of skills do you teach?
Well, we teach writing skills in the history department, reading comprehension. In U.S. history, we rely heavily on primary source documents. I think those are important, that we can see what the people actually said about events or thought processes as opposed to secondary sources. So we really focus on trying to expose students to primary sources, document analysis, as well as writing argumentative essays with that material.
Wow. One thing I would like to know is that as a high school student myself, I know that everybody has trouble trying to find what their calling is in life and what they would want to do with it. So one question I have is, what made you express such interest in teaching?
That's a great question. I'd love to tell you that when I was younger, teaching was a goal or an aspiration of mine. It wasn't. I went to college. I graduated fully intending to go to law school. Moved back to the Northeast, and kind of as I was looking for job opportunities and what have you, I kind of fell into substitute teaching. And I was like, I really like this, something I never really considered. And then obviously I went back to school, got my master's in education, and that was 25 years ago. So it's been a great long run.
Would you have ever considered actually going back and going on to law school, or did you immediately get hooked on teaching?
No, I think the connection was pretty strong early on. I got into education. I was teaching about an area of that I was passionate about, and getting to work with such a group of young people. And every year it's a different group, and different developments, and seeing them, develop and grow and become upstanding members of the community and stuff. Once I was hooked, I was in. So I've been in, yeah.
Thank you. And since you've been in this environment for a good while now, I'd like to ask, what parts of teaching come the easiest to you?
Come the easiest. I would argue that there's nothing particularly easy about it, but I would say I really find that I'm fairly outgoing, and I find that establishing relationships early on with students in my class and students in the hall or students that I've coached or whatever, I find that that's an area that I find is easier for me than others, again, because I tend to be a little bit more outgoing and more willing to kind of take that first step.
Right. Have there been any types of activities that you've created to get that same outgoingness with your classmates?
Well, we try to do some collaborative work in class. We try to give students an opportunity to work with each other, give students to work whole class activities, sometimes group activities, sometimes partnership activities. It's always a challenge, especially in the beginning, where you put 20 to 30 people who may know each other, may not know each other, have varying experiences with each other, and I try to make it a goal within a really short time to make sure I know everybody's name, make sure I know something about that student, and put them in an atmosphere where they can feel safe to work collaboratively and kind of maybe come out of their shell a little bit if that's possible. But again, that's not for everybody. Different people are different. All students are different, and that's good to respect that as well.
Right. Well, my next question might actually come a little bit easier to you, considering your response to the first one. I would now like to ask, what do you think is the hardest part of teaching?
Hardest part of teaching, I think, honestly, is time management. I think I could do my job probably 20 hours a day, 7 days a week, and still have stuff to do. Just trying to find great ways to assess the students, great ways to teach the students, ways to try to keep the students engaged if I even succeed in that. But I think to me that's the most challenging, is that just trying to find new ways to challenge and at the same time, hopefully inspire some students to do their best.
Could you give us any examples of how you tried to make the class more engaging?
Well, again, if I go to like street law, one of the things I do is I reach out to other members of the community. So I have a number of different judges that come in from different courtrooms. I have other people from law enforcement. I have attorneys, probation officers, clerk magistrates. So trying to expose them to different careers and different people who actually work in the field, to me is something I've tried to do to keep fresh, and I try to add to that list. So the people that I've had some people who've been coming for almost a decade that have been great friends of the class, and I have people who've just started last year who've also become great friends of the class, and I think that's something to try to keep it fresh and innovative and hopefully inspirational for some of the students.
Thank you. Now, my next question I would like to ask is, what do you think the best study material is to provide your students when a test or a quiz is coming up? I know that some teachers prefer to do study guides where you usually have 1 or 2 questions on every subject that you've done, but I also know that some teachers like to have their students rely on their past material.
I would say it's probably a combination. You were in my class a few years ago. I don't know if I'm supposed to say that or not, but you were in my class a few years ago. I like to give study guides. I like to give them in advance, about a week in advance, to give students an opportunity to make sure that they're familiar with the material and use the class material that we've used, whether it be the readings or things that we've done in class, Google slide presentations, what have you, video, so that they could synthesize a great answer to those questions. I also make myself available a little bit during class to answer questions that students might have. So I actually think it's probably a combination of both, but I think a study guide is important so that they know really where to focus their attention.
Well, how many study guides do you think would be necessary to cover the year? Because I know that some subjects require a lot more information than others.
Well, again, it would depend. Usually for each unit test, there are 9 units in US 1, so there would be 9 of them. If I decide I'm going to assess something different, I would, of course, make a study guide for that. So I would say at least 1 for every unit, and then potentially a few more depending on what we're doing. But I would say 9 or 10 would probably be a safe bet.
Right. Now, even though the classroom is a place of learning, we both know that it can't be peaceful all the time. And while you could say that most of the time it's just roughhousing between friends, there are also times where it can become a little bit more serious. So I would like to ask, how do you deal with disruptive behavior or bullying in your classrooms?
Well, I mean, obviously something like bullying I would take very seriously. But I would say I'd be fortunate in the sense that I think in my class we establish ground rules very from the first day. We go over expectations. Those expectations are enforced in terms of how interactions between students, how interactions between student and teacher, how that is going to be conducted. And I think establishing that early on certainly helps ensure that it's a safe learning environment for the students. Also, I think how you deal with the situation in terms of, if someone is having a bad day, which we've all had, for a variety of reasons, maybe pulling that person aside, having a little conversation with them. And I think that's where, going back to, I think, your first or second question, establishing some sort of positive relationship with that student can be beneficial. Because we've all had bad days, we've all had done silly stuff and things that were, oh, I can't believe I did that. And I think also giving the students an opportunity, if they've made a mistake, to come back from that mistake, because I think that's important as well.
Could you provide us with any example of you using any of these strategies to help a student? You don't need to name anybody.
No, I wouldn't do that. But no, again, if I'm teaching in the classroom and there's a student that, you can see something going on, I'm not going to try to get into their deep personal business, but sometimes they'll let I had a tough morning, or I'm having a tough day, or something like that, and that's good information to know. And I think, again, it comes back to knowing your students, knowing the people who are in front of you. So there've been plenty of times where I think you could be proactive and you can see that this is maybe not going to be the best situation right now. Maybe we can take some steps to ensure that we have a productive class, we have a productive setting, and nothing escalates. So I think de-escalation is also important. If you get to a position where things are getting a little heated, de-escalation I think is really important. I rarely, if ever, remove students, but de-escalation I think is important.
Now, another thing that is very common, especially in our learning landscapes today, is that many people are split on whether or not phones in school are helpful or a hindrance. And in many cases, it can go both ways. But at the same time, and this is just me speaking from a student standpoint, there have been many times where I've walked into class and I've seen phones be an issue to the class. So I would like to ask, what are your policies for phones in class? Do you, if you have a policy, and if you don't, what do you do when you catch a student on their phone at an inopportune time?
Well, it's a great question, and I think it's a question that everybody in education kind of wrestles with a little bit, because you're right. They can be used for educational purposes. They can be a valuable tool for learning. My experience is that's generally not how they're used. And again, it's a kind of a blanket statement, but my phone policy has changed over the last couple of years. I do collect phones at the beginning of the class. Obviously, I have the students put them in the thing. They can see them. I don't touch their phones. I'm not interested in their phones. But I find that, and if a student has a reason, can I keep certainly it's not, mindless, give me everything. But at the same token, I think creating an environment where people have less distractions, I think, is important. And I think for a lot of people, the phone is a distraction and a detriment to their learning. But I agree, it can be used for an educational tool, and I've done so as well. But my policy, and it's evolved over the last couple of years, is I ask the students to give them up. And quite frankly, some students generally appreciate it because they recognize that staying off their phones is a challenge. And by removing that temptation, it kind of helps them a little bit.
Very nice. Now, probably, I remember you saying during one of the questions that, the fourth question, that time management was something that you had a hard time with, and I'm under the assumption that time is spent grading kids' work from the day or even the week. So I would like to ask, what do you think? What is the most effective way to grade a student? Do you grade them one? Do you grade them one class after the other, or do you prioritize different types of work, like say homework over a project?
It's a great question because you get a little bit of both, right? So homework is generally a pretty quick grade and you can get it done. I mean, I have generally 52 minutes a day in school time to use as a prep period, which I can use for correcting and what have you. I think it depends. I try not to have students wait too long to get graded work back, so I sometimes prioritize, who's been waiting longer. I try to have everything done within 7 to 10 school days and posted. Homework would be earlier than that, but some of the tests and quizzes, I mean, again, if I have 80 students that each wrote 2 pages, that's a lot of reading. They spent a lot of time writing it. I should spend, a lot of time reading it. So I think that really is the challenge. I do try to go class at a time. And if it's a test, I try to get the test done for one period and then do another one later on. But I think from like most teachers, there's a lot of work that gets taken home to do the grading and preparing for classes in the future as well.
Very nice. Now, since we're on the subject of work, I know that homework. I know that the concept of homework is also something that many people are split about, and not just students, even though we complain about it the most since we have to do it, but I've heard that even some teachers ask whether or not homework should be necessary. So I would like to ask if you could explain what your output is.
It's a great question, and it's also something that I struggled with. To get in my personal life, I have 3 children, a senior and a sophomore in college, high school rather, and one in 7th grade. And their schedule's busy, just like students here. Schedules are busy, and I try to be very judicious with homework. I don't assign it blanketly. I don't assign it. I don't say you should be doing a half hour of homework a night. I think that's unreasonable for the classes that I teach. One of the things that I do is if I assign, it'll be a couple assignments over the course of the week. And again, back to the study guide or the planning, I always post them a week in advance so students can always see what's due, when it's due, so they can plan accordingly. If you have a game or if you have a play or you have something that you have to do or a family event, you can plan around that. So I think homework is important. I mean, I use it to introduce new topics or reinforce things that we've done in school in the day, but just to assign it, it doesn't make any sense to me, and I think it's kind of not worth doing. But if it's just for that, but if it's for real class purposes and something that I think will advance the learning, then I think it's important as long as it's reasonable.
That is a very good point to make.
Oh, thank you.
Now, another big thing about teachers is that every teacher. Again, I think I've said this before, but every teacher has their own style of learning, right? But there's also the subject of how the teacher decides to present themselves. Because some teachers try to go into a class smiling ear to ear, thinking that every student has their best intentions, while others, preferably those who have been in this environment for longer, tend to get a little bit sterner as they learn the rules and ways that the kids act. So I would like to ask, describe what your teaching style would describe what your most effective teaching style would be. Would it be more cheerful, or would it be more stern, or somewhere in the middle?
No, I can be stern. That's not generally where I like to work out of. There's the old teacher saying no, you shouldn't smile till December. I generally enjoy what I do. I usually smile on the first day. And I think it's a little bit of class dependent in terms of, but I think, again, establishing those rules, and there's nothing exciting or fun about going over expectations and rules, but you can have fun within those parameters. And I think, laughing and having fun and enjoying what I do and hopefully the students enjoying the class, I think is important. So I wouldn't describe myself as stern in any way, shape, or form. But on the same token, I think there are really clear expectations, and if they're not adhered to, then there'll be consequences and what have you. But I think generally speaking, no, I try to be cheerful at least. I mean, not every day, so just like students, teachers have bad days too. But I try to be generally cheerful and pleasant.
That's very understandable. Have you ever met anybody, students, teachers, any family or friends or anyone who has different views on teaching?
Yes, yeah, a lot. I mean, it's funny. My brother's a teacher, elementary school, And yeah, I mean, you could get 100 different books on educational philosophies and what style works best, and there'll be data to support a whole variety of different topics. I think one of the things about teaching is that there's some recipes in terms of like ingredients you can put in that sort of help, but how you use them and sort of how much of them you use, I think is sort of up to the individual teacher. And I think that's something where what works for me might not work for, if you ever got into the field of education, it might not work for you. So I think part of the whole journey is finding out what works best for you and what works best for your classes, so that you can sort of present yourself in a way or present the class in a way that's beneficial for everybody.
Very true. Now, one thing when it comes to teaching, there are many different subjects and units that you have to discuss within a number of days, and I know that number of days can be different depending on what classes are you're teaching. But I would like to ask, in general, how much time do you spend on each unit?
To your point, it's really dependent. If it's something like the Constitution or a big idea that we're going to be using throughout the class and really going to be using, quite frankly, for the rest of your life, then we'll spend some more time on that. If it's a unit that's maybe a little bit more, maybe less significant, maybe a little bit less time. So it's usually dependent, at least a month, but it could be 2 months.
All right. Well, I'm sorry to say that our time has run out today. So I would like to thank you, Mr. Goff, for coming today. And this is Devin Townsend from Kent Community College, Kent Community Television from the Dog Pound. Thank you.
Your periodic crew today is Don Albert, Nala Caufield, Tom Carey, Dan Ferreira, John Flood, Connor Jurgen, Nolan Gillis, Asher Hum, Emma O'Hara, Tom Rose, Mike Sullivan, Nike Torreno, Leo Villeneuve, Adrian Welch. I am Mark.